Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had not been able to bear children for him, but she had an Egyptian servant named Hagar. So Sarai said to Abram, "The Lord has prevented me from having children. Go and sleep with my servant. Perhaps I can have children through her." And Abram agreed with Sarai's proposal. So Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar the Egyptian servant and gave her to Abram as a wife. This happened 10 years after Abram had settled in the land of Canaan. So Abram had sexual relations with Hagar, and she became pregnant. But when Hagar knew she was pregnant, she began to treat her mistress, Sarai, with contempt. Then Sarai said to Abram, "This is all your fault. I put my servant into your arms, but now that she's pregnant, she treats me with contempt. The Lord will show who's wrong, you or me." Abram replied, "Look, she is your servant, so deal with her as you see fit." Then Sarai treated Hagar so harshly that she finally ran away. The angel of the Lord found Hagar beside a spring of water in the wilderness, along the road to Shur. The angel said to her, "Hagar, Sarai's servant, where have you come from, and where are you going?" "I'm running away from my mistress, Sarai," she replied. The angel of the Lord said to her, "Return to your mistress and submit to her authority." Then he added, "I will give you more descendants than you can count." And the angel also said, "You are now pregnant and will give birth to a son. You are to name him Ishmael, which means God hears. For the Lord has heard your cry of distress. This son of yours will be a wild man, as untamed as a wild donkey. He will raise his fist against everyone, and everyone will be against him. Yes, he will live in open hostility against all his relatives." Thereafter, Hagar used another name to refer to the Lord who had spoken to her. She said, "You are the God who sees me." She also said, "Have I truly seen the one who sees me?" So that well was named Bir Lahai Roi, which means well of the living one who sees me. It can still be found between Kadesh and Bered. So Hagar gave Abram a son, and Abram named him Ishmael. Abram was 86 years old when Ishmael was born.
All right, so are you ready to jump into a story that's, well, it's ancient, but it feels strangely current?
Definitely. Always up for a good story, especially one that stood the test of time like this.
We're diving into the book of Genesis, chapter 16.
Oh, Genesis. Getting right into it, I see.
Right. No time to waste. So Genesis 16, it's a story about family drama, ancient customs, and, a little divine intervention for good measure.
Sounds intriguing. What's the setup? Who are the players in this ancient drama?
Well, we've got Abram and Sarai, who later become Abram and Sarah, obviously. They're like these huge GE figures in the Bible, right? But in this story, they're dealing with a really tough situation. They can't have children.
And that's not just a personal thing for them, is it? I mean, in that time and place, children were everything.
Exactly. It's hard for us to really grasp that today, but in their world, not having children, it wasn't just sad. It was like a social disaster. It had huge implications for their place in society, their legacy, everything.
So they're under an immense amount of pressure. I can't imagine what that must have felt like for them.
Right. So Sarai, she's desperate for an heir, and she comes up with a solution. She offers her Egyptian servant, Hagar, to Abram to have a child with him.
Wow. Okay, so we're already diving into some pretty complex territory here. Surrogacy in the ancient world. It makes you think about the power dynamics at play, even back then.
Absolutely. I mean, it was a common practice back then, but it's hard to imagine the emotions and the complications that must have come with it. And guess what? Hagar gets pregnant.
Oh, boy. Oh. Here we go. Talk about a situation ready to explode.
It totally does. The story tells us that Hagar, she starts to disrespect Sarai, she's obviously feeling threatened and powerless. So naturally, she lashes out.
And can you blame her? In her mind, her entire world is being turned upside down.
Right. And Hagar, she's stuck in this impossible situation too. She can't win. So she does something pretty drastic. She runs away into the wilderness, alone, pregnant.
Wow. Talk about a desperate situation. I can't even imagine the fear she must have been feeling. That's a whole other level of vulnerability.
Absolutely. And it's in this moment of complete despair that something really interesting happens. She encounters an angel.
An angel. Okay, now it's getting really interesting.
This isn't just some random messenger, though. This is a direct encounter with, like, the divine. And then the angel, he gives her some pretty direct instructions. He tells her to go back to Sarai and submit to her authority.
Wow. So not exactly the message of liberation she might have been hoping for in that moment.
Right, but there's more. The angel, he also gives her a promise. He tells her that she'll have countless descendants, like so many, you can't even count them. And her son will be, well, he'll be a wild, free spirit, a leader.
Okay, now that is a promise. It kind of reminds me of the covenant God made with Abram, right? The promise of descendants as numerous as the stars. It's like Hagar's son is being woven into that same larger divine plan, a plan that unfolds over generations.
Exactly. And there's another detail that I think is so powerful. The angel, he tells Hagar to name her son Ishmael, which means God hears. It's this incredible reminder that even when we're at our lowest, when we feel totally alone, God sees us, God hears us.
It's interesting, it makes you think about whose stories get told and how they get told. Hagar, she's often relegated to a footnote, but her story, it's incredibly significant.
Absolutely. I mean, think about it. In Islamic tradition, Ishmael becomes the father of the Arab people. Her story has had this massive impact, and it's still unfolding.
Right. And it raises all sorts of questions about power, about how we treat the vulnerable, about the choices we make and how they ripple outward, affecting not just us, but generations to come.
Exactly. And those are questions we're still grappling with today, aren't we?
Absolutely. Genesis 16, it's not some ancient fairy tale. It's a story that's still so relevant, so challenging, so full of these deep truths about human nature and about, frankly, the world we've created.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? It makes you wonder, how does knowing Hagar's story, her resilience, and the promise given to her in Ishmael, how does that change how we understand this bigger biblical narrative? What new layers do we discover? It's a lot to ponder.
It really is. And, maybe that's the point of these stories, right? They challenge us to think differently, to wrestle with big questions, and ultimately to see the world with fresh eyes.
Couldn't have put it better myself. Until next time, keep diving deep.